My name is Sam Lemmon, and I am currently a graduate student at Grand Valley State University in the Educational Specialist program, and I have an emphasis in educational leadership. I have my bachelor's and master's degree from Grand Valley State University as well in secondary education, history and geography, as well as educational leadership for the graduate program. That said, the project that I've submitted for this research symposium is Informational Text, the Key to Success in School and Life. And I have to mention that I was assisted in this by Julie Alderding, and I will point out a couple data pieces that she gave me as well later on in the presentation. Now that said, if you look at this first visual that's on the screen, you can see a lot of the terms that are associated with informational text. And the question that I want to ask is, or answer is, why would informational text be such an important thing to look at? And it's really a threefold answer. First off, it is a very data-driven educational climate. And what is the main type of data? It's standardized tests. And the number one type of reading on standardized tests is informational text. Okay, secondly, informational text is a cross-curricular, cross-grade level type of concept. It can be read in first grade through 12th grade. It can be read with students that are struggling. It can be read with AP and IB students. It can be read in obviously your core classes. It can be read in your supplemental classes like art, band, choir, PE, home economics, or family living type courses. It's really a type of reading that really hits just about every class that you can offer at a school. And then thirdly, why is informational text such an important skill? Over 80% of all reading after secondary school graduation or after high school graduation is informational text. Now, what type of reading is informational text after high school? You look at newspapers, periodicals, internet-based reading. Anything that's not really a novel that you read as an adult is a piece of informational text. And a lot of us read on a daily basis, and it's not novel reading. It's things that we read for our jobs, and that is strictly informational text. So one can see that obviously it's important for the school's performance with the data aspect, it's important for student performance with the standardized test aspect, and it's important for career and life readiness because that's the number one type of reading that one will do. Now, what's happening with informational text currently? And the answer would be not a lot, unfortunately. A 2004 study from Duke pointed out that less than 4 minutes a day are spent on informational text in the average first grade classroom. A similar study in 2009 pointed out that by 4th and 5th grade, students experience anxiety when reading informational text because they're not familiar with it. They're just not exposed to it enough where they feel comfortable and confident in their ability to decode the reading and answer questions based on it. Now, the Common Core, which has just come out for some subjects, has been out for a few subjects, is about to come out for a couple more subjects. It stresses a 50-50 split between informational and narrative text at the elementary level, and then a 70-30 split, informational 70, narrative 30 at the secondary high school level. Now, the middle school years, which is important to me because that's where I teach, is kind of that gray area of going from 50-50 to 70-30. Now, I like to focus on the 2-to-1 aspect, and I'll get to that in a moment with a visual. But those are really the reasons why I decided to focus on this topic as my research project. Now, what are the skills really that are associated with informational text? A lot of people are not aware. So if you look at this next graphic, it really lays it out pretty simply. The left-hand column, you have informational skills like inference, causality, vocabulary development, interpretation of graphics, tables, charts, and author's evidence. Can you analyze what you read and decide if that is supportable? Those are higher level thinking skills in Bloom's taxonomy. Now the column on the right are literature skills, comprehension, identification of theme, identification of details, identification of context clues, phonemic awareness, phonemic fluency. These are lower level skills on Bloom's taxonomy. Now, it's not to say that they're not important skills, because I would argue that if you are not adept at literature skills, you're going to have a very difficult time with informational text. If one can't read fluently or can't identify characters or identify plot or identify what's happening, how can one evaluate the source or infer meaning from a reading or identify and evaluate causality related to a non-associated piece of writing or a project or paper? So really, it's more or less a foundation with literature, as it says, foundation skills. And then the harder skills come in informational text. Now, where did I decide that it was needed at the elementary level? As I mentioned, the one study pointed out from 2004 that less than 4 minutes are spent at the first grade level. And the reason why, part of that, it's misleading. If you look at this next chart here, this is from Jenison Public Schools, Sandy Hill Elementary. This is their reading readiness data from 2012, and again, this was provided by Julie Aldering. The reason why I say it's misleading, a lot of students are just learning to read in first grade. Obviously, as you learn to read, as the bars demonstrate, you have a high level of students that are not proficient. The lighter level bar is the students not proficient in informational text. The darker bar is the students not proficient in narrative text. Obviously, the narrative number drops in the next 5 years. First grade, it's 50%. Third grade, it's 38%. Fifth grade is 35%. Or I'm sorry, 36%. So you can see there's kind of a steady downward slide in how many students are not proficient, which is actually a good thing. The graph actually kind of displays the information in a negative light. Now the lighter bar is the students that are not proficient in informational text. And as the narrative text is going down because teachers utilize that at the elementary level so heavily, the informational text is actually increasing, which is a bad thing. That means more and more students are not proficient. So in first grade, where 55% of students are not proficient, it's up to about 65% in fifth grade. So more students, even though they were exposed to reading in school on a daily basis for 5 years, actually got worse at informational text. And again, the reason why is even the Common Core is stressing a 50-50 split. They know it's far beneath that, thus the students are struggling. Now, if you look at the next piece of data, which is from Comstock Park Public Schools at Mill Creek Middle School, where I currently teach as a 7th grade social studies teacher, this is our MAP data from 2012 in the fall. You can see students entering middle school in the 6th grade are about 10 points worse in informational text skills than they are in narrative text skills. And that continues in the 7th grade. You can see they're still worse off on informational text, even though it's incorporated more. In the 8th grade, they're worse off as well. Now, the bar doesn't grow from 6th to 7th grade. Just as a disclaimer, the reason why, the 7th grade where I currently teach is a very academically advanced class. They've been advanced since elementary school. Their MEP scores, reading readiness, DIBELS, everything has really shown that they are better readers. Thus, their score is a little lower. But I will come back to their score in just a moment because there is kind of a unique aspect to how they did on the second MAP results. Now, again, you can see here, as students are more familiar with narrative text, they do better on it. Much like the elementary graph, this really just kind of supports the idea. Now, that being said, at the beginning of the year, we decided that as a 7th grade team, we were really going to focus on informational text. So we went to some PD at the beginning of the year. Over the summer, a few of us read some books on informational text and skills to increase student performance on those types of readings. And when our first MAP results came out, we knew they wouldn't be great. And like I said, you see 43% of students in the 7th grade were below proficient on informational text, and 41% were below proficient on narrative text. We just last Friday, so 5 days ago, just completed our final second round of MAP data, and we're just looking at the scores this morning. Our informational text score that was below proficient went from 43 in October actually down to 32 this marking period last week in February. And then the below proficient in literary text, which went from 41, actually dropped to 30. So we still are better at literacy text, which you can thank the language arts teachers for that in the 7th grade. They decided to focus on narrative while the other core content teachers focused on informational text. you can see we made about a 10 to 11% gain in each area in roughly 12 weeks. Now, that's not to say that informational text or a decided focus on reading is always going to improve you by 10 percentage points. That was a huge, huge adjustment for our grade. But you also have to remember, this is the first year that we've really focused on that as our key point across the school, across the content areas. Which, as I mentioned earlier, informational text is a very cross-curricular, cross-grade level skill. So it's something that the 6th grade worked on last year, the 7th grade is working on, as well as the 8th grade is working on this year. So it's a much more ever-present aspect of the student's day. Now, how does one actually go about incorporating informational text and seeing similar gains to this? If you see the visual that's been put up here, here's the first step, and this is vital. This is number one, okay? You have to actually be dedicated to incorporating informational text. You can't just say you're going to incorporate informational text and have students read out of the book. The textbook is not your only source of informational text. As a social studies teacher, I like to incorporate newspapers, periodicals, online readings, things that I can really bring in that are supplemental readings that really are much more timely and relevant to the students. I will admit I never have students read from the textbook. That is a resource for them. I will find readings that are better, much more applicable. They do a lot better job really bringing the information to life. Now, the second point you can see on here is that you have to develop the reading skills. You have to model them. I typically try to read informational text every Monday and Friday. Now, Monday we typically read 2 informational text pieces. Fridays we'll read 3 to 4. And on Wednesdays, that's the day that I try to do a narrative reading. So that 2-to-1 ratio, roughly 2/3, close to the 70-30 percentage, much further away from the 50-50 at the elementary level. Now, when I model it for the students, typically what I do on Fridays, it's timed informational text reading. They'll have 3 to 4 readings ranging from a page to a page and a half with some questions that accompany them, and then an authentic writing piece that they have to create after the readings, synthesizing all the information they picked up. So what I'll do is the first reading, I'll read the questions, I'll read the reading, I'll go back through and tell them what I would have answered, show them how I got the answers, what words I didn't know from the reading, and how I figured out what they meant based on the context that they were in. Then I'll ask students to participate and see what words they didn't know, how they figured out what they meant. Just modeling the behavior that, it's okay not to understand everything in informational text, but by utilizing certain skills that we were taught through our PD sessions, you can really make it a lot easier piece to understand. And the big key that I really want to stress here is the quote at the top there from Sarah Brown Wessling: text cannot operate in isolation. You can't just teach what the text says. You have to actually teach the concepts around it, and then the text supports what you teach. So for example, as a social studies teacher, when I teach about slavery, it can't strictly be the students read about slavery and that's all they learned. Text can't be in isolation. It needs to be an integral part of the activities. If I did a simulation with slavery, I have students read about the same thing we just simulated. It supports it, it develops their vocabulary based on the fact that they're in a simulation on it, and it allows them to analyze how the simulation was carried out versus how fact actually had it played out in history. And then, as I mentioned on Fridays, after I have them do their readings, they do these authentic, created pieces. I have students write papers based on what they read, create presentations on what they read, create projects. Oftentimes these are in groups with the exception of the paper. And this allows students to not only read information and try to decode it and work on those informational text skills, but then they get the peer support, and maybe where one student can pick it up and another is struggling, they can help each other, and that only strengthens the student that already knows it. And again, part of the way that I do this is teaching thematically, and this is that 2-to-1 breakdown that I mentioned I would get back to if you look at the visual that just appeared. I try to use this when I pick out the readings for the week. I try to get at least 2 informational text pieces and then 1 narrative piece. Oftentimes it normally ends up being about 3-to-1 in social studies, but 2 to 1 is definitely a great mix. And it may not be the same for everyone. That's the key point. Just because I do it one way doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it. The math teacher doesn't use a lot of narratives because it's kind of difficult to find a narrative about math, whereas you can find a lot of informational text that utilizes math. I'm fortunate in my discipline that, let's say I'm teaching about slavery, again, to use that, kind of continual example. I can have an informational piece about what slavery was. I can have a narrative where a person actually talks about being a slave. Then I can have a second informational piece and have students compare the facts they learned in those informational pieces and that vocabulary and see and analyze that narrative and see if it's actually factual, if the author has evidence for the statements that they're writing. Essentially, though, the whole concept of this thematic teaching is right from this visual. You look in the middle and it says, what is your theme or essential question? You have this question you want students to be able to understand at the end of a unit, and how do you get there? You have them go through simulations in class. You have them do notes, your regular everyday activities. But the big way to get them to understand it by reading is to incorporate informational text that supports those activities in class and a narrative that supports not only those activities in class, but also those informational texts. It's basically the idea of you mix it all together as long as it's, based on the same concept, and you can really support that essential question. Now, to kind of wrap up the project, the point that I want to make that I mentioned here is the data that we found at Mill Creek is not going to be indicative of every school. Most schools will not see a 10 to 12% jump in 12 weeks. That was extremely rare. I mean, exciting for our school, but rare. The point is that this is a system that you can constantly analyze. If informational text isn't helping, then maybe you're not doing it right, or maybe you're not utilizing a skill set that the students really need. If you're an informational text deliverer and it's all vocabulary and the students struggle with vocabulary, then obviously that could be readdressed in another manner. Or if they're excelling at vocabulary, you need to pick up another skill that they can work on. But the key point here with informational text, it's going to be utilized. It's on standardized tests. It's cross-curricular. Everyone can utilize it. It's not just a language arts person, reading person, this is all yours, make it happen. This is something every teacher in a building can do. As I said, this is going to be with the students until they leave the planet. I mean, literally, it's that long-lasting. Informational text is everywhere. And if our goal as a teacher is to prepare students for the future and prepare students for a career, what is a better skill than, hey, 80% of what you're going to do in your life is this. Let's get them ready for that 80% by focusing on informational text. It's going to make the students better. It's going to have teachers who are evaluated better, which for me as a teacher, that's great. I want to have, as I said, good evaluations, but I want it to be statistically supported. And it's going to make your school better, which, again, in our data-driven society, that's an essential point. Now, that being said, I thank you for taking a few minutes to look at informational text. I really hope you consider some of the concepts that were presented here. And the last visual here, just before I close, this is where I gathered a lot of the information, myself and Julie Allerding. Again, she helped me with a lot of this. Informational text, it's not going to go away. The Common Core is pushing it. Your school should be pushing it. It's a great tool for students. It's a great tool for teachers to be able to support the things that you're doing in the classroom. And really, it's an essential skill that people need both now in school and to be successful in life. Again, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, please let me know, or please respond to this video, and I will try to do my best to get back to each and every one of them. Thank you.